Hi.
Afternoon.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So we will start shortly. Another what, 3 minutes.
My session would be below 1 hour also.
Wow, that's good. Short
So, yeah,
and
hopefully still sweet.
sweet. Short and very sweet. Oops. Okay. So yesterday, I think we had about more than 100
My session would be
in WebEx.
below 1 hour also.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, so there's echo.
Short and very sweet. Right?
YouTube ke, Prof?
Tak ada. Ke mana datang?
Yesterday, I think we had about more than 100 in the back.
There's echo.
Oh, I didn't realize I have 2 windows open. I have so many windows and tabs open on my web browser.
Shows you are a
Sometimes-
busy man.
Sometimes I get confused. All right, so I can see that Farhan is here. Farhan is our former Deputy Vice Chancellor. So I'm sure he will have a lot of questions. So welcome to Farhan, Prof. Tapsia. We have quite a number of engineering people here, and Prof. Wong. So I think they are always very interested in rubrics, because they have a long history of OBE.
Right, OBE.
I had a good discussion with a colleague during our meeting recently in Putrajaya, talking about the flaws of OBE. Good discussion about some of the so-called the flaw in OBE. But I want to elaborate on that. Oh wow, it's 3 p.m. already, so let's start without wasting time. Baik, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat petang, selamat tengah hari, selamat sejahtera kepada semua rakan-rakan yang dapat hadir dalam webinar kita pada petang ini. Warm welcome to everyone, to all the academics and the participants in the webinar. In the WebEx here also, the participants on YouTube. We are streaming this session live also to YouTube. So for your information, the webinar is these are the series of webinar series. This program is a webinar series brought to you by Center for Development of Academic Excellence (CDAE) or Pusat Pembangunan Kecemerlangan Akademik. Our role is to run a professional development program or training, to put it simply, to all our 1,800 plus academic staff, close to 1,900 academic staff spread over the 3 campuses. My name is Abdul Karim Alias, the director of CDAE. So today, we are very lucky to have again Professor Dr. Wong Suluan from UPM to share with us on the assessment. So yesterday, we have the first part on the ABC of rubrics. If you missed that session, I would highly, strongly recommend you to watch the recorded session, which we can find on our YouTube CDAE YouTube channel. Yeah, so you will find the recorded session yesterday there. And I would highly encourage, if you missed that session, or even if you follow the session, it's good revision, as a good review, to revise again. You can watch that recorded session on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell so that you can get a notification of the latest video in our YouTube channel. So Prof. Wong, thank you so much for being with us again today. Yesterday was, I think, a very good session. We had a relatively good attendance in WebEx, also on YouTube. And we had a lot of questions also yesterday. So don't feel free to ask any questions. Please put capital Q in front of your, before your questions, so that we can easily sort out the questions from the comments. I have introduced Prof. Wong yesterday, so maybe I can skip that part. But if you like to know, about Prof. Wong, I have put the a brief biodata of Prof. Wong in the chat box. So feel free to check that out. So today, the topic today, the second part on assessment on rubrics. Today, I think Prof. Wong will be sharing with us on the topic of crafting rubrics for assessment in 5 easy steps. So without further ado, I will pass on the screen to you, Prof. Wong. Silakan.
Thank you, Prof. Karim. Let me share my screen first.
Okay.
Is it showing?
Not yet. I think it's coming up. Still not coming up yet. Okay, yes, it's okay. Now we can see the slides.
All right.
Twenty-six slides only, eh?
Yes, very short, Prof. Karim.
All right.
All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this session again. And I presume there will be some of you actually who had followed yesterday's session. Welcome back. And I think I had agreed with Prof. Karim yesterday that I could show some of the additions to the questions that were raised yesterday. And one of the questions was about this common European framework of reference. The question was whether the CIFIR rubrics, would it be an analytic or a holistic rubric? Yesterday, Atika from UTM sent me the documents, and I had a look at the documents, and I'm just pulling out one example of the rubrics that was in the document. And this is what we have here, the overall oral comprehension. Let me just pull out the my laser pointer first. Now, from what I can see, you have this particular framework has some kind of codes on the left-hand side. I'm presuming that this C1, C2 are actually the competency level of the student or the person who is being assessed. And if you look at, let's say, C1, C2 can understand with ease virtually any kind of language, whether live or broadcast, delivered at fast natural speed. You will see that these are some descriptors of the performance. Remember yesterday in our last session, I had mentioned about some keywords which are criteria, we had rating scales, we also had performance descriptors or performance quality. From this diagram here, or from this table, you would notice that it's a one-dimensional table. And this is quite a characteristics of a holistic rubric. So going back to the question, is this a type of analytic or holistic rubric, my answer would be a holistic rubric for the severe rubrics. Then there was another question about the bell curve. Remember yesterday there was a question about whether I had actually had a bell curve for the courses that I teach, that I use the rubrics. And this is a course that I taught last semester. You can see that the graphs, it shows quite a bell curve here, a normal curve, yeah. But if you look closely, you would notice that I don't have students scoring B plus and below. No students scored C plus, C, D, and F. And neither did I have many students scoring A. The majority of my students scored A minus. So going back to the question whether you would get a bell curve, this is what I have. I would say yes, it's a bell curve, but if you look closely, it's a little bit skewed in the sense that because all my students did quite well. The lowest was a B minus and the highest was A, but not too many, 17.5%. Now, let's get started right into the session for today, crafting rubrics for assessment in 5 easy steps. When I was actually creating rubrics, I discovered that it could be quite tedious because there are quite a number of things that you need to look into. And based on my own experience, I have actually categorized them into steps. And I tried to reduce the number of steps. And finally, I think I am comfortable with 5 easy steps, which I'm going to share with you this afternoon. That's my email. In case if you didn't get it yesterday, you can email me. You can reach me through emails. Yesterday, I did receive a couple of emails from friends from UUM, from UTM, even from UNIMAS, and I've replied your email. This is the goal for this session. It is aimed to equip you with fundamental knowledge to design and develop your own analytic rubrics. For this session, I'm going to zoom straight into analytic rubric. Yesterday, we have seen the types of rubrics. There are 2 types of rubrics. And for today, I'm going to zoom in, focus on just analytic rubrics. I have only one LO, design and develop analytic rubrics. By the end of the session today, you should be able to design and develop your own rubrics. That's my aim, the learning outcome. And what am I going to have in the course content would be the steps that I have put together for you to be able to design and develop your analytic rubric. The question then is, what are the 5 steps? I'm going to walk you through today from step number 1 and until the end, which is step number 5. And I only have like 23 or 24 slides for today's session. And I am hopeful that you'll be able to create your own rubrics after going through these 5 steps. These are the 5 steps I'm going to share with you. First of all, it starts with defining the purpose of your learning tasks. What does it mean by learning tasks? These would be your learning activities or the assignments that you have designed for your class based on your learning outcome. Your learning outcome, I'm sure you are familiar with your learning outcome. You can find it in your course content or your course synopsis. It should be there. And I believe that for every course content, you would have like at least 3 to 4 learning outcome, the 4 LOs, yeah? When you have actually defined what is the purpose of having your assignment or creating this assignment for your students, what do you want your students to achieve? In what form would the assignments be, and what product or process are you measuring? So we're talking about performance. In what form the performance that you are going to measure? And yesterday we covered also on, when you talk about performance, there are 2 types. One is process and the other one is product. Once you're done with step 1, then we will move on to step 2, which is to choose your rubric. There will be some questions that you are going to be having that I'm going to share with you in this slide today. The types of questions that will guide you towards which direction. If you answer yes, yes, yes for a set of questions, then that would lead you to an analytic rubric. If you answer yes to all the questions, which is tied to the holistic rubric, that will guide you towards creating a holistic rubric. Once you're done with step 2, then we move on to step 3, which is define criteria. By now, you should be familiar with the keyword, which is criteria. What is it? It is part of a rubric. And after you have defined your criteria, we then go to step 4, which is to design your rating scale. And we had seen some examples of rating scales. You could have 3 rating scales, you could have 4 rating scales, yeah, and they are all in ascending or descending order. And lastly, as I said before, this is the hardest part to write, which is to write the performance descriptors, or in other terms that you can actually find would be performance quality. And that would be the last step in creating and designing your rubric. And once you have completed step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we will then have a complete rubric. Let's start with step 1. Step 1 is to define the purpose of your learning task. Why do you have this assignment? Why did you actually design this assignment? Your assignment could be project, it could be final year thesis, or the FYP final year project. It could be some learning activities that you design for your students. And these are some guiding questions that will help you in defining the purpose of your learning task. Will I use the rubric to assign learners grades? Well, I think all of us would agree that there are times when we do not actually grade our students' activities. They are just activities, they are just exercise that we do in class with our student. Well, if you are going towards the direction, maybe your learning activity would not have a rubric because it won't be grading. But there are also cases when, although they are not to be graded, you may have a rubric. If you want to show your students here, where are they, the progress of your students, and students will be able to do self-assessment. Will I use the rubric to provide informative feedback to learners? Yes, yesterday we discussed also the benefits of using rubrics. One of the benefits is to provide informative feedback to the learners. Why did they score 5? Why did they score 1 for that particular criteria? What are the learning outcomes of the task? So this ties back with OBE. You need to have the learning outcome. You need to be aware of the learning outcome for your course, and how will learners demonstrate that they have achieved the learning outcome? This is what we mean by the performance. Would it be measured in terms of its process or product? That is step 1. This is an example of an assignment developed by my colleague for this course, which is Diffusion of Innovation. This is a postgraduate course offered at our faculty. Now, this is what you should have. This will help you define the purpose of having this assignment that you design. Let me read out the description of the task. This is an actual task that was given to the master student. The purpose of this assignment is to assess learners' cognitive and analytic skills in applying knowledge gained and constructed throughout the course Diffusion of Innovation by watching the Surrogates movie and writing an analytical review of the movie in the context of innovation diffusion. It means that the students were required to watch a movie. So what was the movie? It was the Surrogates movie. And based on the movie, students were required to write an analytical review, which means that the student had to submit a review to the instructor. And according to the instructor, I want to provide learners with informative feedback on the cognitive and analytical skills, such as the following. What I've highlighted in red, the fonts: applying the concepts of innovation diffusion, making judgment on the senses related to innovation diffusion identified from the movie, selecting and critiquing theories of innovation diffusion and making connections between theories, as well as arguing the proposing necessary solutions to the problems shown in the movie. What is highlighted in the red fonts are actually what are your expectations of your student. These will help then for you to define the purpose of your learning assignment or learning activities. Then once it's done, you already know what's the purpose of giving this assignment or creating this assignment, we go to step 2. This is where you are at a crossroad. Are you going to be using an analytic rubric, or are you using a holistic rubric? We have seen and we discussed about the differences between an analytic rubric and a holistic rubric. I mentioned before yesterday that analytic rubric is usually used for a formative assessment. You want to give opportunities to the students to improve their assignments. Holistic is when the grades is final. Now let's look at the question here. Do I want to provide detailed feedback for the learning task? Do I want to provide informative feedback for each component of the learning task? Do I want to provide formative feedback about the learner's performance on individual elements of a learning task? If your answer is yes, then you are going to create an analytic rubric. But if your answer are no, your answers, but yes to all these questions. Do I want to assess the learning task as a whole? Do I want to make a general judgment? Do I want to assess learners' overall performance for the learning task? Do I want to provide summative feedback about overall learners' performance on a learning task? If your answer are yes to all these questions, then you are set for a holistic rubric. So these are some guide for you in deciding whether a holistic rubric or an analytic rubric is suitable for your assignment. What is it that you want your students to achieve, and how do you want to measure your students' performance? For this session today, I'm going to highlight only for analytic rubric, but I'm convinced that once you know how to create your analytic rubric, you will have no problem creating your own holistic rubric. I showed this table yesterday. It's a two-dimensional table. We had criteria on the left-hand side. For this table, I had only shown you 3 criteria. You can have more than 3 criteria. It depends on how you want to assess your student. If you want to have more detail in terms of the rubric, then you can have criteria 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. And what you have on the top here, again, it's your rating scales. Low, moderate, high, and the rating scales, you have scores attached. I also mentioned that not necessarily you have scores attached. You may not want to have scores here. You just want to show your student that you are currently in this category, moderate. You need some improvement. And perhaps if the student is at this low category, which means that they need to put in more effort. But if you want to put in scores, it also is possible, depending on your assignment needs. And then we have these cells, the desired performance descriptors are written here. Once you have decided on that for step 2, then we are going to move on to step 3, defining your criteria. I mentioned also that when you define your criteria, it needs an expert. So all of us, when we teach the course, we are experts in that content area. And what are the criteria that you are going to define? These are some guiding questions to help you. What do I want the learners to learn from the learning task? In what ways will learners demonstrate what they have achieved in terms of knowledge, psychomotor, or affective domains? This means that your rubric could be measuring various domains. Either you want to focus on just knowledge, it could be a combination of knowledge, psychomotor, or perhaps even affective. And what are the attributes of the final product? Would it be a product just like the student's assignment they hand out, that's a product, or are you measuring process? We have already discussed the difference between process and product depending on what you want to measure and what is it that you think is important for your learning outcome, how it aligns with your learning outcome. That's step number 3. And when you talk about criteria, these are some characteristics that you need to consider. It's very important when the characteristics are observable and measurable. The criteria must be observable and measurable. It must be something that you can measure. It is important and essential to the content that you are teaching. How do you know it's important? That goes back to your area of expertise. And the criteria should be distinct. There should not be any overlapping between one criteria to another criteria. And this is very important, phrase in precise, unambiguous language. Remember, when you are creating your rubrics, it is just not for you, not only for you as an educator to grade your students. We had discussed yesterday that it would be good for you to share your rubrics when you are handing out the assignments at the beginning of the semester. It means that the rubric should be written in a manner that is not too complicated. Your student is going to read that rubric. They are going to decipher the contents of your rubric, and that would be the expectations of the educator or the instructors towards the students. This is something that I have to stress very much on, the characteristics of a good criteria. And it takes quite a bit of practice. And sometimes we miss some criteria. And rubrics is always, it's an ongoing work, you know. It takes time for you to improve. And don't be discouraged when the first rubric, the first draft of your rubric doesn't look that good. You can discuss with your students, you can discuss with your colleagues to get some more ideas on what other criteria could be included into your rubrics. So it's just basically work in progress. Going back to the assignment that I showed you about watching the movie Surrogates and writing a critique and a review based on the movie. This is an example of the criteria for the course expectations of diffusion of theory course. There are more than 3 criteria in the actual rubric, but I'm just pulling out 3 for you to have a rough idea of what is then selected as the criteria for this particular assignment. The first criteria identified by the lecturer is communication of theory knowledge. Second is communication of content knowledge, which means that this lecturer, Dr. Masnida, my colleague, she decided that the criteria for this rubric would focus on the student's ability to communicate the theory knowledge as well as the content knowledge. And then she wanted to see as well the connections between the content knowledge and the theory knowledge. These are the 3 criteria that I'm showing here. Now, I realized that not everyone has the same background as me. So maybe it will be quite difficult for you to actually understand what I'm saying. I'm giving you another example. This is an example everybody would be able to relate to. Yeah, baking an apple pie. So with the Raya mood coming soon, I'm sure all of us are busy thinking of what to bake or what should we actually buy and all that. When you talk about the apple pie, food everybody can relate to. So let's look at this example. An example of a suitable criteria for baking an apple pie. You look at the criteria here. I have chosen 3 criteria. When you talk about baking, the first thing you may want to think of is what's the recipe, right? We need to know the recipe in order to be able to produce a good apple pie. Then, when you actually want to prepare your apple pie, you need to think about the apple filling. How would you cut the apples? And how would the crust be? So I'm going to use one example here to follow the steps. As I go back and forth using the example about the Surrogates movie, I'm also going to include a general example for everyone who's not from, who's from various backgrounds. That makes it easier for you to follow today's session. This is an example, yeah, only 3 criteria. And 2-dimensional, remember, this is an analytic rubric because we are going to have the rating scales, and later we are going to have the performance descriptors. Now we come to the next step, second last step, which is to design the rating scale. The first assignment that I shared with you, we had 3 criteria, which is communication of content knowledge, communication of theory knowledge, and connections between the content knowledge and the theory knowledge. And when you look at the scale here, this is where you decide on the level of mastery. What is it? Yeah, the mastery level with the corresponding scores. So the mastery level here is in the form of adequate, developing, competent, and excellent. I've also here attached some scores. If the student is at this adequate category, then they would receive 1 mark. If they are at this excellent category, they would receive 4 marks. And the scores are arranged either in an ascending or descending order. So this is an example of an ascending order. So 1, 2, 3, 4. If you want it to be in descending, then it will be 4, 3, 2, 1. That's fine. It depends on your style, how you want it to be. Going back to the recipe about that apple pie, yeah, we have this criteria, and now we look at the rating scales. Below expectation, meets expectations, and above expectations. So this rating scale, it doesn't have any scores attached to it. It only has 3 categories in ascending order. And yesterday we had one question: how many would be good? How many rating scales would be good? Yeah, and I mentioned between 3 to 5. If you want to have more, that's fine, but I wouldn't recommend anything below 3, because we want to be able to differentiate our students' mastery level here. If you have too small, too little rating scale, then you would have difficulty in differentiating the students who are good. Yeah, some could be average students and some could be excellent students. And what I need to emphasize here is the scales must be continuous. It shows progression and equal. If you have some scores here and your scores has a range, let's say below expectation you give 0 to 5. Meets expectations, it probably be 6 to 10. And then above expectations, your scores would be 11 to 15. That is what we mean by equal. If you have some scores 0 to 5, and then you have meet expectations, you have 6 to 20. This is what it means that it is not equal. It has to be equal. The proportion should be the same for each of these mastery level or the scales that you have designed for your rubrics. And we've come to the last step, which is to write the performance descriptors for the scale levels. What are the characteristics of a good performance descriptors? Number 1 is still the same, just like what we had for the criteria: observable, measurable, and specific. There's this extra word here, extra term here, specific, which means that when your students look at your rubrics, they know exactly what is required for them to score 5 marks. That's what it means by specific. Then the second characteristic or second point here would be parallel language to describe performance. What do you mean by parallel language? Yeah, I'm going to show you an example in the next slide. The wordings for each scale is consistent. There must be consistency in the way you write your performance descriptors. I'll show you some example. One, a good example of the performance which is written very nicely, very consistent in its term and language. Another example which is not so nice, not so good. And this one, number 3, is the most important for your performance descriptors. Your performance descriptors should show, yeah, this characteristic: vary in degree. When you talk about vary in degree, what does it mean? Yeah, it means that variation in degree is described in terms of amount, in terms of frequency, and intensity. I will show you an example also what it means by, for example, intensity. Once you have all this understanding about your rubric, I'm convinced that you will be able to create your rubric which is suitable for you to measure your students' performance. Right. This slide shows as an example of what you mean by not in parallel language and what it means by parallel language. Let's look at the example of that apple pie I mentioned earlier. The last criteria was crust. The scale was below expectations, meets expectations, above expectations. So I have 3 scales. And let's look at the performance descriptors. When you talk about crust, so this is how it's being described. Crust is soggy, heavy, or pasty. Then for this category, crust is somewhat too soft, thick, or hard. The third one, which is the highest level, highest mastery level, crust is flaky and light with even consistency. What is wrong here? What I can tell you here is that the criteria is talking about crust. And when you talk about crust, we usually relate that to flakiness. How flaky is that crust? When you bite it, it just crumbles. Now, there is a mistake in that descriptor because you will notice the descriptor, which is for above expectations, is talking about flakiness for this one. But for the category meet expectations, it's talking about something else. It's not talking about flakiness, but it's talking about softness and hardness. And lastly, when it talks about below expectation, it then suddenly jumps to soggy or pastiness. There is no progression. It has no relation with one another. So this is a bad rubric. A rubric has to be consistent in the sense that for this situation, we are looking at crust as the criteria. The crust should be measured in terms of its flakiness, not about something which is not related to flakiness, not about something which is heavy, which is soggy. This is what I mean by parallel language. And this is a revised descriptor. Now let's look at how it actually improves the crust. Top and bottom crust are not light and flaky. Top and bottom crust are somewhat light and flaky. Top and bottom crust are very light and flaky. This is what we mean by having consistency, but there is some progression. The intensity is different in the sense that one is are not. You see the keyword here, are not. This one are somewhat. There's improvement there. And then you have are very light and flaky. And if you want to add one more criteria, perhaps you can add the word top and bottom crust are extremely light and flaky. So there's progression in your performance descriptors. This is an example which is not related to the course, yeah, but I hope it gives you an idea of how do you actually write your descriptors. There must be some progression. The language must be consistent in the sense that it's describing the same thing. And this leads to what I need to emphasize here, the word degree. Indicate the degree to which standards are met. This is for your performance quality or performance descriptors. Yeah, the description of the performance should be the same across the scale, but it will vary in degree. The keywords that you use will indicate what is the level of or the variation in degree. If you want it to be in the form of amount, frequency, or intensity. When you design your rubric, your performance descriptors, this would be 3 usually used characteristics of your performance descriptors. If you say you want frequency, then probably you indicate how many times, 2 times, more than 3 times, or greater than 5 times. So greater than 5 times would indicate higher mastery level of your rubrics. Now I want to share with you the actual rubric for the course. Going back to the course that I mentioned earlier, which required the students to watch Surrogates, the movie Surrogates, yeah? And this is a complete rubric with the criteria on the left-hand side. You have your rating scales. The rating scales are then matched with the scores. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, you can also change the scores. You don't need to be so definite here, 1, 2. You could have a range, 1 to 5, perhaps, yeah, then 6 to 10. Sometimes when we are grading the students, you know that you have various students. You have more than like 30 students or 40 students in your class. And the students seem to be in this level, but not all the students are same. Some students could be, well, they deserve a 1. Well, but there's another student who's also in the adequate category, but slightly better than this student. Then you might want to give marks, higher marks than 1. That's why you can have a range. I do prefer having a range rather than this very fixed 1, 2, 3, 4, so that it's more flexible when you are doing your grading. And you will notice there's a missing cell here. Why is there a missing cell? It's because the instructor decided that in relation to these criteria, connections between the content knowledge and the theory knowledge, it would suffice to have only 3 levels, 3 mastery level. Everybody would have at least 2 marks here, which means that if the student are able to connect between the content knowledge and the theory knowledge, and it's evident, then the student would score 2 marks. That's a minimum, yeah? And if excellent, not only they are able to do the connections between the content knowledge and the theory knowledge, which are evident, it should be relevant, it should be elaborative. Students are able to elaborate further. This deserves 4 marks, which falls under the category of excellent. Now, let's look at the second criteria. Communication of theory knowledge. Yeah? If the student is just able to indicate a theory, just mention, very simply just mention a theory without going in detail, without giving any elaboration or describing it, then it will deserve just 1 mark from the instructor. But if the student is able to indicate more than 1 theory, and at the same time able to provide elaborative explanation about them, this would give higher marks. As compared to a student who is able to do this, then that will be considered as excellent and will be awarded 4 marks. So this indicates all the theories of innovation precisely and make more than 3 precise and elaborative connections between the theories. I mentioned before, when you develop your performance descriptors, yeah, it really needs you to think. How do you actually come up with all these words? You start with the lowest level first. So usually when I do or create my rubric, I will start with the lowest level because it requires the least explanation. And from there, I'm going to work on the next mastery level, putting in more words inside, giving it more descriptions, yeah, making it more complex. As you go along to the next mastery level or your rating scale, and then to the highest scale. You decide whether you want to have until 4 mastery levels. Your rating scale is until excellent 4. If you want to have 5, then which means that there'll be more work for you. But having better or more rating scales, yeah, more rating scales means more precise and more information for your performance descriptors. You will be able to differentiate your students. We know that we have students who come from various backgrounds, their capabilities are different. And that will help you to give marks to your students who are deserving of whatever mastery level that they have. That's the whole idea of having this analytical or analytic rubric, creating your own analytic rubric. And you would also notice that this rubric, surely it measures knowledge only. Yesterday we had one question. What if we have a rubric that would measure more than one learning outcome. That means that your rubric would be longer. Because you're having more learning outcome, of course, you will have more criteria, which is aligned to your learning outcome. And it is your decision whether you want to have in one table, you kind of like separate your tables. Whether this learning outcome or this rubric is going to measure just knowledge, and then you have another table which is measuring psychomotor skills, yeah, and then you have another table which measures affective. That's fine. It really goes back to your style, what is your preference, yeah, and how you want to make it look, your rubric. I think for me, my rubric, I really prefer if I can fit the rubric in one A4 size paper. That would be easy, especially when I do my rubrics here, when I am marking. So all my assignments that I receive from my students are all in digital form. I have my desktop in front of me. I'll be clicking, and then I have my iPad with me with the rubrics. Well, it's a simple rubric because I just create a survey form using a Google form. And then I just look at the assignment, then I will be keying all the marks. That makes it easier. I don't need to print out my the rubrics in paper form. I used to do that, but then since working from home, I think it'll be easier, less work to print out papers. So it's all done on my iPad. I think that's what I have for today. Very short and still sweet, like as in Prof. Karen's words, yeah. From step 1, step 2, until step 5. So again, what are the key takeaway points for today's webinar? Number 1, when you create your rubric, yeah, there are 5 steps. The steps would require you to define your learning task. What do you expect your students to achieve? What kind of, in what form would your assignment be? Then from there, you are going to decide that, how would I actually decide whether it's going to be an analytic or a holistic rubric? The questions that I've shared with you will help you in that sense. And when you have decided that this is going to be an analytic rubric that you create, then the keyword next would be your criteria. And I mentioned before, when you talk about criteria, there are some characteristics. It must be measurable. It must be something which you can observe. At the same time, the criteria that you have chosen should be representative of what you have given in your learning outcome. So this deals with validity. You can't be giving some assignments and then your criteria to measure or your criteria that you develop for your rubric is different. Then I would say your rubric is going to be invalid, not valid at all. You're not measuring what you have actually asked your students to produce. And your criteria should be distinct, very distinct in the sense that students know exactly what is it that they need to do and what they should have inside their assignments. Make sure there is no overlapping or redundancy in your criteria. And when you talk about your performance indicators, make sure the words that you use are simple enough, because it is not only you who are going to use that rubric, but your students will be getting a copy of it. That's what I always recommend. Share your rubrics with your students at the beginning of your class so that the communication, yeah, the expectations are communicated to the students clearly. And that would help them come up with a good quality assignment or whatever that they are supposed to create for the assignment. And remember that the degree is measured in terms of amount, frequency, and or either intensity. You can have a combination of these 3. Your performance indicator could have frequency inside. It could have a combination of frequency and amount. It could have all 3 inside. So by all means, yeah, be creative when you create your rubrics. And Again, if you didn't join my session yesterday, I'd like to recommend this book written by Susan Brookhart, How to Create and Use Rubrics for Formative Assessment and Grading. This is a very straightforward book, no bombastic words here, straightforward, simple terms is used for you to be able to understand about rubrics. And lastly, the references that I have is the same as the one that I showed you in my slides yesterday. It's still the same, but I probably need to point out to you this particular reference here. The link has changed. So unfortunately, I cannot retrieve the link, but what I got from the link is actually reflected in my slides. So if you would like to have a copy, you can either contact maybe CDAE. I will send a copy to Prof. Karim as well. Yeah, and if you like to have it, get it from me, just email me. I'll give you a copy in PDF form. And I think that's all for today. Very short. 5 steps to creating your own rubrics, and I hope it's useful to you. It gets you going to creating your own rubrics, and if you really have your own rubrics, then it will set you to maybe towards refining your own rubrics. And I think I have covered whatever that I need in my session yesterday, and today it's meant for basic beginners as well as intermediate, and I hope probably many of you would be, you would go to the advanced level. Maybe you would be giving a webinar talk for Prof. Karim then, and I hope to join them. So thank you very much, and that's all for today's session from my side. Prof. Karim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Wong. Excellent, excellent sharing. Well, I guess we have learned something here to help us to further refine our rubric. Yes, I think all of us have got our own rubric simply because we have to meet all the documentation of OBE. And I believe the next level would be to really dive in and really understand the spirit behind the rubric and the proper way of constructing the rubric. So let's look at some of the questions here, Prof. Wong. Maybe we can pick up from the chat box here, starting from 3:43 p.m. there from Dato Ahmad Farhan. So it's a long one. Can you pick up that questions?
Let me see if I can see my chat.
The chat.
At
yeah.
what time?
3:43. You can scroll down, right?
Okay, I'll try. Okay, the last question, is it?
No. At
Yeah,
3:43. Yes.
Question,
yeah.
which is better?
Yep.
You share the detailed rubrics with the students when the assignment is given, A. B, you just mentioned the criteria in the rubrics. You will be assessed based on the following criteria, and we'll only give them the rubric when we return their assignment. C, same as B, but without students need to know the detailed rubrics. What are the pros and cons?
Multiple choice question here.
Yes, it's a multiple choice question. Right. For me, I really prefer if I give the students the actual rubric. That would actually help the students to understand clearly what are my expectations. But yesterday we discussed about giving rubrics at the very beginning, because there is a possibility that students' creativity will be restricted. They would follow exactly what we have and they won't go beyond. And I think we also agreed that when we give the rubrics to the student from the very beginning, we need to emphasize to the students that don't just restrict yourself to this rubric that is given by your lecturers or by your instructors, but you should think out of the box, go beyond that. And based on my experience, when I give the rubric to the students at the very beginning of the class or the semester, so when I give the rubrics and the assignment in week 1, when I see my students for the first time, I give it to them, the assignments, and I give the rubrics to them as well. I find that the students have less questions to ask me, which means that I'm assuming they understand better about my assignment. Prior to me giving the students, there was a couple of semesters that I decided not to give to the students. The students will start asking questions week 2, week 3, week 4. it goes on to that extent, and that tells me that students are still so blur about my assignment. It's either, yeah, when you develop your learning assignments, the questions that you have for the students, there's always questions that students are unsure. And I personally prefer to give the actual rubric to my students, but that's really depends on your preference. If you think that maybe you just tell them what are the criteria, you list it out to them. But from my experience, when you list out to them, students, just being students, they don't really pay attention to you. But when you have something which is concrete, you give it to them through the WhatsApp group that you create for your class, or you put it into your learning management, this is the rubric, then they would know that this is exactly what they need to do. So that's my answer.
Okay, Dr. Farhan, you want to you want to clarify further, or is it okay?
Yeah, I think thank you, Prof. It's just that sometimes our students, when we give the rubrics, they don't go beyond the rubrics. So it's somewhat like us. Even in assignment, they are being spoon fed. It's just my thoughts. But I like your suggestion. It's really up to us. I guess it depends on the learning outcomes, and it also depends on what do you really want to test them on. So I'm glad that you actually agree that we have our choices in answering the multiple question. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually one of the main concerns that we discussed yesterday, that by giving the rubric, students would really focus on meeting the requirement to get the highest score, for example, and they are they don't go beyond. They don't go beyond because at the end of the day, they will probably, some of them would say, "Why should I go beyond? Because as long as I can get the highest score, and that will do." So this is what we don't want. So I think the onus is on us again to really keep encouraging our students to tell them that it's more than just the rubric. Of course, easier said than done, because we were students also. Last time we were also students, and we in our mind is always a grade, right? That's how the system was designed. Anyway, to my staff here, Eton, Ozana, or Wani, please help me to copy the question from YouTube to our chat here. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next one at 3:47. From Wong, from Dr.
3:47.
Ramziah Nasir there. Can you find it? 3:47 p.m.
Okay.
Do we need
to have the sum of all criteria be 100%, or can we exceed 100? I think you can have more than 100, but later on you need to convert it. So some of my rubrics actually is just 50%, 50 marks. 50 marks, it depends on what you actually want to, how much you want to give the weightage for your rubrics. There's no definite answer to that. It must be 100%. Sometimes my rubrics is just 30. The marks is 30 only. Then I do the conversion later.
Okay. So there's no hard and fast rule on that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I hope the answer is clear to you, Dr. Ramziah. Yeah? If it's good, then please show good, the icon good there. We want to make sure that everyone is happy at the end of the session. Yeah. So I want to give the chance or the opportunity to everyone to clarify anything that you have any doubt on rubrics. Yeah, that's our intention. Okay, the next one at 3:49, Dr. Nur Nadia there. Can you pick up that question, Prof?
Okay, let me see. We found that two criteria are correlated with each other and one criteria implies the other. Do we remove one of them or simplify the rubric? I would recommend that you try to merge it into one if both are important. And you can also remove, looking at which is more suitable or more appropriate for your learning assessment. but you should never have your criteria which are redundant or overlapping. That would be my answer.
Yeah, in relation to that, Prof, do you think it's good practice after we have done our rubric, we share or we get our colleagues, one or two, to give their opinion or to get their feedback on our rubric?
Yes, I do agree that this is a good practice, especially if you are doing a course which has more than one instructor, or even if you are doing this course alone, but I'm sure you have friends and colleagues who are in the same field as you. It would be good to ask for opinions. How is it that this rubric, is there any way that I can improve? So find the people who are in your field, who has expertise in the same field, and to get more ideas. I would recommend that.
Yeah, because I read in one of the articles about good practice, best practices in with respect to rubric. One of the suggestions is actually to get our peers, especially in the area, to give feedback on our rubric. I haven't done that actually myself, but I hope I will try to do that as well. Okay, the next question from Dr. Radia here at 3:50 p.m.
In the case of language-related courses, such as linguistics, the students can do good work except the grammar part is extremely sad. Can I then have a separate rubric just for the grammar part of all courseworks? Sakit mata, sakit hati. Okay, I think you can. No, there's no issue of having a separate rubric, especially for grammar, because that's very important for language-related courses. So it's good if you want to create just a very specific rubric for grammar. That'd be good. I recommend it.
How does that work?
So, Prof, then I will have
Yeah.
like 2 rubric just for the working part, and then I will have another rubric just to focus on grammar itself. Is it like that?
Yes, yes. So it would be more work for you actually. When you do your marking will take longer time.
Yeah, sounds complicated to me. But is it common practice?
Yeah, Prof, because if you're doing language and then your language is horrendous, and then when they graduated, the people will look at the transcripts. Yeah, they get an A for the work, but when they look at the writing by the students, then they will the outsiders will question, how can this person get an A? Because like I said, they can do very good work, but when it comes to writing, aduh, hancur buat tata bahasa, even sampai ke tahap PhD. So that's why I asked this question, because kalau if I were to give in one rubric, I can see like 50 for grammar, 50, and then I can see the students boleh cover up dengan all the work, but still when it comes to grammar, totally out. Itu yang kesian dekat pelajar lah. So itu yang tanya Prof, boleh tak if I were just to focus on grammar itself, and then the content part, the working part tu another rubric. Kalau and then like Prof Wong said, if boleh then okay lah like that. Tak adalah student tu perasan yang dia sebenarnya dapat A because bahasa dia bagus.
Wow.
Which means that in your assignment, when you give your assignment, one of the expectations that you are going to indicate your assignment is that grammar would also be graded. You're going to look at the student's grammar.
Yes. Actually, for me, the grammar part is more important than the process of going through and doing the work, because at the end of the day, when your when your degree states that you are holder of ijazah sarjana muda, sarjana or ijazah kedoktoran bahasa Melayu, and then your grammar is like, it's like you haven't been to a BM course, then something is way wrong. So for me, the grammar part is more important, although when I look at the content, kita kesian because so sometimes close one eye just to give them a better grade, but when you look at the grammar, then aduh, goyang kepala.
Okay, all right. Okay, good luck, Dr. Odi. Okay, let's pick up another question at 3:53. This is a question from YouTube, as we are all in learning mode. Can you get that question?
Yeah,
Prof?
okay. As we are all in learning mode, are you aware of instances where students point out that rubrics given by the academics are incomprehensible or require improvement? So far, I haven't had comments from my students about the quality of my rubrics, but I do think that it may happen. Students have the right to give comments because they are the one who are doing the assignments. And I would recommend you to get feedback from your students at the end of the semester so that you can have time to do revision to your rubrics and then improve your rubrics for the following semester. So that is possible for you to get feedback from your students. But I think if you have a stage where students complain is incomprehensible, your rubrics is bad, I think you probably need to look into your rubrics, and maybe your rubrics was not so well developed after all.
I think probably it's good practice to explain it or go through or walk through the rubric with the students at the very beginning, and then get them to clarify anything that they are not clear. So if that has been done, then I think there's no issue that students do not understand the rubric, right?
I agree with you, Prof. Karim, that we usually, when we give the rubrics and we give the assignments, we are there to explain to the student what you need to do.
Yes.
This is the rubric, yeah, for you to score 5, this is what you need to do, and so forth. So the explanations helps in that sense.
Okay.
Prof, when we modified the rubric, can I say then the intention is just to the main intention is to help our student to pass the course, to get a better grade, and not to penalize the students. Is that, can I say that? When I corrected, when I asked my students if they need some kind of modification for the rubric that I'm using for them.
Well, I agree with you. Well, we want our students to be able to improve themselves and to acquire the knowledge that's expected of them. So that would be okay.
Okay. The next one at 354 from the Kavita there.
How do we prepare rubrics for midterm exams and final exam questions? The formation rubrics should be for each questions. Yes, for every question, you will have your rubric for every question. But for final exams, my rubrics are quite general, actually. Not as detailed as for the assignments, because final exams, it is a holistic rubric already. You don't need to give the opportunity for the students to do improvement. They simply can't. So it's quite a general rubric for me to grade the final exams and the midterm.
Okay. Next one at 355 from Dr. Lim Yixiang there.
Is discussion rubric considered as process or output indicator?
Discussion rubric.
You meaning you are actually looking at how students discuss. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, Dr. Lim, you can clarify if you like. Dr. Lim Yixiang, are you there?
I think probably the question is discussion. So when you want to measure, I'm just guessing here, that you are measuring the discussion that's taking place in your classroom. So that would be process.
Prof, is it like when we assess our students, we are not just looking at the end product. We also we'll also look at the whole thing from minute 1 until the minute they upload their work on eLearn. Is it that kind of thing? Can we give grades to the process itself and not just the end product?
Yeah, when you measure performance, there are two types of performance. There are process. Yeah, it's like for example, if you have the students from the music degree, you are looking at how they play the piano. So that's a process. There's no product actually in that sense. But when you are looking at product, then it would be something tangible, something that the students produce or create. So it could be either way. What type of performance we will have to decide at the very beginning when we are defining the purpose of our learning activity. just don't be too restrictive in the sense that every assignment that you produce, the students produce, must be in a form of a product. No, it depends on your field also actually.
So it's not a sin to combine process and end product when we assessed.
No, at all, not at all.
It's not a sin. Okay, all right. Okay, I hope you don't mind, Prof, to answer. Yeah. Okay. Todi, okay? Todi, okay?
Okay, Prof. Okay, Prof. Thank you so much,
right.
Prof. Wong. Very helpful.
Yeah, Prof Wong, I hope you don't mind to answer a few more.
All right.
Yeah, the next one at 3:55 p.m. Question.
Okay, 3:55.
Yeah.
Is it a good practice to constantly update the rubrics after getting feedbacks from various parties, especially from students? I would recommend doing it after one cycle, which is after one semester, to improve or to refine your rubric. Yes,
Okay.
my answer would be yes.
After one semester, yeah, you can do that, but after first cycle completed, then you can do it for the next one, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one will be quite a long one there from the Wei Xiang Chang.
All right. Mention that we can get feedback from colleagues and students as well, so there could be continuous improvement for the rubrics. But since we have shown the rubrics, let me see.
It's moving.
Oh, okay. It's moving. But since we have shown rubrics in the beginning of the course, is it wise for us to make changes to the rubrics at the mid of the semester? As some students might have already done work according to the first rubric, or we should only make changes for the next year. I wouldn't recommend doing it during the semester when you're already given the rubric to your students. I agree with you that it would actually disrupt the students' learning process. So that would not be a good practice.
Yeah. After the first cycle, as you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe the final one, I think at 4 or 5 there, question for you.
Right. Using rubrics will tend to skew the overall results towards majority achieving excellent grades. Some academics prefer a normal curve. What is your comment? I think we had that discussion yesterday.
Same issue we discussed yesterday.
Semalam bincang, Prof. But anyway,
just going back to the graph that I showed you yesterday. You know, the graph that I showed at the beginning of my webinar, it does look like a normal curve, yeah. But if you look closely, I don't have students who scored C+ and C and so forth, yeah. And I think for me, I am really very proud of my students that they have achieved the learning outcome that I have set for, which is aligned to my learning activities. And no issues about students. Can you imagine here, 42.5% who scored the minus. Well, they met all the criteria they scored based on what I have set for this learning activity. So why do we want to penalize our students in that sense that we downgrade them or we give them lower scores? If they have achieved what they deserve, then they should be given the grades that they deserve.
So, Prof Wong, I take it from what you're saying just now that you are against normalizing the curve, right?
I am.
Okay, maybe just for the sake of discussion, maybe I'd like to ask, I don't know whether Dato' Farhan is still there.
Yes,
Dato', I just want to ask your opinion because previously, you're our previous Timbalan Chancellor. What's your own personal opinion on this normalizing the curve?
Disagree.
Okay.
Good to hear that, Dato'.
We should allow it. You know, I don't like this massaging.
Okay.
That's my point. Thank you.
Me too. Okay, we are together. Okay, Prof Wong, you are so good in this one. Some requests that you come back for more. Come back to give more topics on assessment or maybe related topics. I think there's a request there for you to come back with more topics on assessment. What about others? Do you want Prof Wong to give more on assessment? Please say yes.
Yes.
You're
loud
putting
and
pressure
clear.
on
Yes,
me.
yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
in the chat box. Oh
Yes,
wow,
yes,
so many
please.
yes. So
Yes,
many
please.
yes. Okay, Prof. Wong, please consider because I think we really enjoyed.
The bulat
I
suara,
think
Prof. Prof.
Yeah?
Wong, si bulat
Thank you,
suara.
thank you.
Apa ni, short and sweet and yet solid. We learn, and I think we learn more also from the Q&A. Yeah, Q&A. So I guess there are more on assessment, Prof. Wong. I don't know what's there that we need to know about assessment or about rubrics maybe. Assessment, the big one, and rubrics.
Yeah,
What
rubrics
is
is one small part of assessment actually.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So
And there'll be a lot of things to cover in assessment in terms of like doing authentic assessment,
yeah,
validity of your instrument,
okay.
towards
So
that
maybe
direction.
maybe if you consider just think about the topic, and when you can find a time, we still have a few slots available, and this year maybe actually my focus is to have more topics on assessment, because this one areas that one of the areas that have been, I would say, lacking. So we want to have more and learn more on this one to help our staff to do the right things the right way, doing the right things the right way. So if there's no more questions, yeah, so I would like to, on behalf of CDE and USM, I would like to thank Prof. Wong. Again, hopefully we will see more of you this year, next year, in the coming years. If I'm still around, of course, I will bring you here again. My dear colleagues, please, all the participants, please give a big round of applause to Prof. Wong, yeah?
Thank you, everyone.
And
Thank
also in
you.
the icons, yeah? So
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Wong. Have a nice day. Selamat berbuka puasa, ya. Terima kasih.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Prof. Wong. See you again, yeah?
Welcome. Yep.